Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are holding a presentation called Green Capitalism or Sustainable Transport, the Tren Maya mega project in the south of Mexico. What are we talking about? We're talking about this mega project called Maya Train, which is a priority project for the Mexican government led by Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the government that is closing now the activity in this period, which is a period of new elections. The program for the project is the construction of a train track. It is almost completed in the countries of Chiapas, Tabasco, Yucatán, Quintana Roo, and it's a train using biodiesel to transport goods and passengers that, according to the official documents, is supposed to be an important point for the development of the region across 1,500 kilometers to support the tourism on the Maya sea coast. And it is a delicate issue because it seems that it supports sustainable development and transportation and a will to support the Maya heritage. However, in truth, there are other issues around all that project that are entailed, and we are going to talk about that precisely with Giovanna Gasparello, also considering a reflection and a deconstruction of what appears to be a project apparently sustainable. Giovanna Gasparello is an anthropologist, Italian, working in Mexico, with a trajectory of research and activism. She's a researcher at the Direction of Ethnology and Social Anthropology at the International Institute of Anthropology and History of Mexico, teacher also in the anthropology school, and research about Guerreros, Michoacán, and Yucatán on the autonomy and rights of the indigenous people, law anthropologies, peace and violence anthropologies, and the issues of mega project and the defense of the land by part of the local communities. I would like to remind some of the books and articles written by Giovanna, because she has a long experience on the field of scientific research. In 2005, a volume translated also in Italian called The Possible Autonomy, Chiapas, the Construction of Self-Government in the Indigenous Communities. In 2009, Autogeografías, Experiences of Autonomous Indigenous Experience, and 2020, a first notebook of a series of researches on the Tren Maya, No te lleve el tren. In 2021, Pueblos y Territorios frente al Tren Maya, Social, Economic, and Cultural Scenarios, and 2023, Maya Territory, The Passage of the Train, and some articles connected to the research. In 2012, Where the Flower of a Word Grows, also translated into Italian, which is reflections on the communities of indigenous people in Mexico. 2017, Territories, Mega Mining, and Defense of the Indigenous Cultural and Natural Heritage. 2018, Justice and Indigenous People in Chiapas, From Violence to Autonomy. And 2022, Mining Dispossession, Territoriality, and Commons in the Montaña region of Guerrero. I believe that all those researches carried out by Giovanna can help us to decode what is going on and is almost completed because the project is about to be finished. So I will now leave the floor to Giovanna, who I thank for being here. First, I'd like to say something, by the way. Giovanna has got to go away at 19:15 because of commitments. So you will receive a paper to write your questions. Please don't be too judgmental and just think of your questions at the end of the speech. If you are thinking about questions as of right now, start noting them so that we can gather up and ask the questions as soon as the conference is over. Thank you very much, Giovanna, and I leave you the floor. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for being here, and good afternoon. Thanks, Massimo, for the invitation, and thanks to the organization that invited me to participate into this festival I would like to go straight to the point so that we don't lose any time. My aim is to see an overview of this very complex mega project, which is the Tren Maya mega project. Tren Maya is not just a train, first of all, and we will see why. Undoubtedly, it's a mega project that is articulated across a railroad. You can see it on the map here in the Yucatán Peninsula in the south of Mexico, made of Quintana Roo state with Playa del Carmen, Tulum, Cancun, which are tourist destinations, the Yucatan state with the archaeological zone of Chichen Itza, for example, the Campeche state on the Gulf of Mexico side, and then Tabasco and Chiapas states, where this track starts and finishes in the city of Palenque. This mega project of a railroad entails the constructions of 12 stops and 19 stations. Take into account the fact that in Mexico, the trains used to be there up to 10, 20 years ago. It was not a very well-defined railroad system, such as the Italian one, for example. They were trains mainly for goods transportations. And then, with the neoliberal government starting from 1990s onwards, the railroad system was removed to prefer truck transportations, also roads for tourists instead of railroads. But now this new idea of reactivating or building new railroads can appear to be a good idea, but unfortunately, we are talking about an area, as we will see soon, with a very low population level and not urbanized. So we are talking about an area that we can say as an ecosystem balance, which is not mint condition, but still very well preserved. So building a train, building a railroad, and opening a new way in the middle of hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of virgin forests is representing an environmental and social impact quite considerable. Tren Maya, what are we talking about? According to the official documents, it is a project that is called Tren Maya, but is more than a train. As we all know, all the mega projects entail other constructions and buildings and infrastructures connected to it. Talking about secondary roads. We're talking about electric energy production grids, and we are forecasting the building of those around the railroads. And we're talking about sun power, we're talking about wind power around urban areas. And it's all part of a development plan, an infrastructure development plan, a city development, an industrial development, and the infrastructure project put them into action. It serves as a kind of a driver for them. And the economic growth, the infrastructures, the land government are all revolving around tourism as a driver of this development. That we might say is being imposed on the population. But it's not, as we are saying earlier, just a train. And despite the fact that the Tren Maya is focusing its offering around tourism, mass tourism specifically, which is one of the industries or the sectors that are more thriving. And that are more increasing and growing in Mexico, in Central America, more generally speaking, in the last years, it is a much more articulated project, because there is another mega project of infrastructure connected to it, which is also almost finished, upon which the administration that is now ruling ever since 2019 in Mexico is applied. It's the administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, which is a leftist government, more or less, but it's much more neoliberal and anachronistical in a sense, because the administration has lost the great opportunity to really do something, of the left wing, typically of the left wing, starting from the collapse of the ecological and environmental situation in Mexico. And instead of safeguarding it, it focused on great building infrastructures, millions of workplaces, progress and development, and all that. So this new project, Tren Maya, is connected to another project, which is a dry channel, the Corridor Interoceanico of the East Coast. We are seeing it in purple. It's the tightest area of Mexico. It's an alternative to Panama Strait to connect the two oceans. And this is placed in an ever-growing situation where goods and people are passing through that channel from the eastern countries, specifically China, to all the western countries facing the Atlantic Ocean. On the map, you can also see the areas of oil extraction in the Mexican Gulf, which are marked in orange color. And as a contrast, you can see the main natural reserve areas, the reservoirs marked in green, or protected areas in general. As you can see, all the area crossed by the Tren Maya is a very rich area in terms of natural reservoirs, whereas the Tren Maya project is trying to push the development and the construction of development hubs focusing on tourism. We're talking about new cities and urban areas totally devoted to tourism. The intra-ocean corridor, as it's called, has already built, besides train, highways, and transportation for gas and oil, also 9 industrial development hubs for the well-being, as they call them. You can see another map of the same place, and here you can see the narration, the institutional narration, upon which they are basing these infrastructures. It's the narration of a development that is imposed. You want it, you don't want it, you are going to be developed. It's a forced development. But what kind of development are we talking about? What is the cost of this development? All those areas, mainly inhabited by indigenous people, are in the common sense not developed. So they need a top-down intervention from the side of the state to update them, to modernize them, and place them into the capitalistic economy with all the issues coming after it. We're talking about zones who remained emarginated on the border of the market, of the global capitalistic market, and they are trying to put them in a new market by leveraging on the potentialities. We're talking about great diversity and richness in nature and archaeological heritage. Then this is something to be exploited for the tourism industry. That's what they are thinking. So it is an authoritative idea expressed by the President Andrés Manuel López Obrador at the start of his administration, 2019, when they launched the mega project, and there were critics based on those considerations in a region which was inhabited by indigenous populations and with cultural roots and backgrounds and traditions. It would have been a violation of human rights and nature rights and all that. However, the president said, well, you want it, you don't want it, we are going to build the Tren Maya. This is the starting point, and that's where it all began. A mega project, which is based on an idea of state, because this idea of large mega project is an idea very symbolic. It's an idea of large marks. How may I say it? Large scars that are marked on the land that leave the mark of the government. It's the same thing as the Egyptian pyramids. Very large structures, buildings that represent the grandeur of the regime, which is leaving an unremovable mark for the future on the land. Now, this is basically the main idea behind this obsession for the mega project. But this idea of forced updating, forced development, stems also from an evaluation idea that is disparaging completely the ways of living and the traditions of the indigenous people and the farmers, because they never consider improving the life conditions of the population, which is underdeveloped and isolated according to this ideology. But starting from the enhancement of the economical activities and productive activities, and from the social, historical, cultural background that is already present, this was not taken into account by any means. And they started with the same old logic that we always see behind the colonialism approach, where we would reach territories such as land of nobody. So everything that is there doesn't exist, and we need to bring over development and progress, civilization, bringing it from the outside according to other development models that are already built up. So on one side, we see the thingification, I would say, of everything we find there, of the nature, for example, and as seen as a decoration of the tourist infrastructure, or maybe elements to be exploited. For example, a beautiful waterfall, then we can build a 5-star hotel, so we can wake up with the waterfall caressing your cheeks. By denying the tradition of the land, the dialogical interdependency relationship between humans and animals. So starting from these premises, I would like to briefly tell the 3 dimensions of this type of development that is promoting the Tren Maya in the region of southeast Mexico. The first one is connected to the urbanization and deruralization. So the tourist industry, starting from the idea that the farming activities, agriculture based on families and self-sufficient agriculture is examples of the past, we have to place these people in the formal work. So they need to work and pay taxes. So employ them in the tertiary services business, in the tourism business, which is what they are pushing. But on one side, the tourism sector implies the development of urban areas for luxury vacations and people that can afford weeks and days of luxury. Everybody who is working in the same sector, as you can see in the two pictures, left and right, they do not experience the city in the same way as the tourists. So on one side, you see the resort. On the other side, you see the employees. So the city development is very unbalanced. The luxury on one side and the slums on the other side, without any kind of service. And therefore, developing, starting from the violations of all the basic human rights, right to health, water, housing, education, and all that. Now, behind this idea of Tren Maya, there is on one side a city utopia, where they are promoting the building of 9 new urban areas and 19 stations connected to them, with an idea of promoting, in a way, how may I say it? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So this project, as we see from the official documentations, as a new opportunity, an opportunity to rebalance the demographical distribution in the region, is not a land or a land appliance. It's more an application on the people, because it depends on tourism more than the situation connected to the country. And it's not taken into account inhabitants rather than tourists. As you can see, the ONU Habitat, the UN Habitat project that is dealing with Mexico, is seeing by 2030 an increase in the population in all the region of 42%. So it's in 6 years, we are going to have 42% more people, which is a very high number, especially if you think about the construction of tourist areas, but not on the connected construction of residential areas for whomever is going to work in the tourist sector. And this implies especially a whole series of mechanisms. From one side, the growth of those suburban areas, and on the other side, speculation on the land that the Tren Maya has started. I'm sorry for my Italian, but it's a bit rusty because I speak more Spanish lately. As you can see from this image, we don't see the end yet of the railroad, but all the land has been bought in order to complete the railroad and also to build luxury resorts. It's all-inclusive resorts for tourists instead of residential areas, which are close to the Tren Maya stations and on the railroads. And this triggered a speculation on the land, which is unfathomable. The price of the land have increased by 200 and 300%, depending on the areas. And the investments, the construction industry has increased by 300%. And the railroad is still ongoing. It's not completed. It's still halfway there. So when we talk about all this luxury development, as you can see from the map, it is basically that. It's in the forest where nobody lives there, and out of the blue, you start to urbanize like that. And then the result is this one, those artificial landscapes, which could be areas such as Hong Kong, Merida, or Oslo. They all look the same. And the building of areas that have no feature or specification connected to the land where they are placed. On the other side, you can see those images on the right. Those were the homes built for the people that has been evicted because they used to live on the railroad trajectory. So they were removed from there, and they built those beautiful houses, all looking alike in concrete. So this is the idea of living that entails a conversion of the cultural models, a total paradigm shift. Because the people living there are identified by also the way they live, the cultural model of living, and you see how we change it. On one side, there is still a relationship with the fields, with the land, with the peculiar climate. But on the other hand, we see those luxury residential areas, and then the humble homes for the evicted that have nothing to do with the way of living that the entire region used to see, which is in contrast with this utopia of condensing people in the cities. And this is an idea that was spread even before the colonial age. Those are tiny villages scattered around the region with few inhabitants. And this is due to the fact that the land is very frail. It doesn't have much distribution of surface water. There is only underground water. So tiny villages are more sustainable than large cities. But we know that it's kind of obvious. But try to tell that to the International Fund for Tourism and the president of Mexico and the Mexican army, which is the one in charge of the building for the railroad. The relationship, however, that the Mayan people have with the land they inhabit is very different. It is an interdependency relationship built on a cultural basis between the humans and the environment. The word territory, we could translate it into Maya as Chibalil, which means basically the family that bonds us. So the idea of all the living beings and non-living beings that constitute the environment around us are part of a family, a familiar personal relationship of dialogue, intimate dialogue. And this intimate relationship with the territory is made up of different elements that constitute, for example, what surrounds us, the woods, the field, the orchard, the country. So different stages of a territory that is more or less urbanized, where the production work of the man is placed between the orchard and the field and the woods, where you gather timber or you hunt for animals. This is all articulated with a rich knowledge coming from traditions. For example, traditional Maya knowledge finds 20 types of soil, 25 types of vegetation, 50 varieties of maize. So it's a variety of knowledge based on the production activities of the different places. And the Maya region, we know it's very marked land, inhabited by human and non-human beings, the guardians as well of the territory. And then we see the production activities that are not still in time, but they keep renovating. As you can see here, you got the strengthening of the honey production, which is an activity that is developing so much recently. It is, of course, a traditional activity that is now also developing, and it represents a great opportunity without affecting the traditional production cycles, but it can also compete strongly on international markets. Second scenario that the Tren Maya is bringing about in the Maya land, it is the one connected to the commodification, you could say, of culture as a good part of tourism. Now, this is clearly a process that is on march and has been so for decades in the Quintana Roo state, especially because mass tourism has diversified its offering. There are areas like parks of similar Vestiaret. It's like a Disneyland park, and they are offering for tourists both the representation of ceremonies and rituals of Maya people, but also they include real archaeological areas in the same setting of the park. So all this heritage, made up or real, is offered in the same plate as an attraction. And on the other side of the coin, we also have the touristification of daily life in the Maya villages. So we have tours that are bringing the visitors to experience the life of a traditional Maya community. You can eat the tortillas freshly made. You can see the exotization of daily life as if it was something special, something to showcase and discover. And inside this dimension of commodification of culture, as we were saying, we can see the commodification both of allied culture, as we said, but also of the cultural heritage, the architectural and archaeological heritage, which is plentiful in this region. So far, it was not explored because of lack of funds, and also because, let's say, discovering new archaeological elements is part of the experience, but also you have to preserve them and safeguard them. You need funds. And also because you have to carry out researches on the archaeological heritage, because it is an element that allows more information, more elements that allow us to understand the history of the preceding cultures of a specific land. So the archaeological exploration is part of research to generate knowledge and to generate historical conscience. Unfortunately, that is not what is happening. Across the entire railroad, what started through opening new ways in uncharted territories created a huge wealth of archaeological elements that have been discovered. The railroad allowed that, but there was no time to carry out research, because as soon as a breach was opened, the machines had to go through and build the railroad. So what is being promoted now is that the few things that were saved from the construction machine is unknown, but they have been already labeled. They put the price on it. There is a ticket to pay already to build parks, amusement parks. And the idea is that everything is going to be exploded in the tourist industry. You can see in this picture, this bridge that the Republic President and the Director of the Anthropology and History Department is showing. As you can see, is a viaduct, a flyover, because you can see underneath it, it's full of caves and underground rivers and the hoods. It is an area which is rich in archaeological findings. And they've already decided that this is going to be an archaeological park for amusement, basically. So these archaeological findings, the wealth that is found in the Cancun Playa del Carmen area, we're talking about the Caribbean coast of Mexico, the underground of that region. In the view of Maya, the cosmo view that Maya has of the infra-world, the religious conception of the Maya, this part is full of temples and I can't find the word that I like to say, unfortunately, but this is an element that was found underground while they were opening this way for the railroad. This is what was underneath. This is why you can see the line is not perfectly straight, because in that circle of woods you see in the middle, there was this architectural building. But then they built this. But this was made in order to not destroy the ground, but look what was behind, underneath. This is underneath. This is the cave underneath. This is one of the elements that in the latest months and year upset the public, because we are witnessing the utter devastation of a whole system of caves, underground rivers, and caverns, which is unique in the world. Because in order to sustain this huge bridge, this huge suspended bridge, it is necessary to stick those cement pillars in the underground. But that's not all. It was just Monday, actually, because the weekend, the president of Mexico met up with the Guatemala president with this idea of strengthening the border and controlling the migration streams. There was also the idea to strengthen the infrastructure that is connecting the two countries. And the Mexican president suggested that the Tren Maya could reach Guatemala. But this idea that the Mexican president more than once used to leverage the cultural richness of the indigenous people, but also the historical and archaeological heritage, can be used as an excuse to justify the mega projects such as the Tren Maya. This idea of connecting Mexico to Guatemala in order to connect two huge archaeological areas, Calakmul in Mexico and Flores, the Tikal city in Guatemala, by lengthening the Maya train track. But in order to connect those two archaeological areas, you need to cross the largest forest area of the Central America, and is the second after the Amazon forest, which is the Selva Maya that connects the biosphere area in Calakmul to the one in Maya. As you see in the map, this is a huge area of forest which is perfectly preserved. And then we reach the final part of the impacts of the Tren Maya on the land, which are the impacts, consequences on the ecosystem. Because it represents a breach of 80 or 100 meters. It is a barrier that cannot be overtaken by wildlife, for example. But if you think about this is the area with the highest biodiversity and highest preservation of the whole Central America, where there are more than 50 natural wildlife areas. But in this moment, the priority of the Mexican administration to preserve this as is, because it is an opportunity we have now, instead of saying what they are saying, putting on the market and building infrastructures, building streets, roads, and new cities. This is something that really answers to a logic of the post-war Marshall Plan rebuilding, instead of 2024 era of the ecological collapse. The water, because the train is stopping the water resources underground as well. The Yucatán Peninsula, as you can see, have no rivers underground. All the water is underground. So any kind of intervention on the surface have an impact on the water underground, have an impact on the layers where there is water. It's a porous ground. So the official narration would be that no single tree would fell. But in February 2024, more than 10 million trees were cut down. And those are approximations, because the slaughter of ecology is undeniable now. And this is all due to this mega project. When we denounce such tragedy, such model of development, we are not starting from an environmentalist, classical environmentalist conservation model that we must preserve the environment and exclude the human societies. It's not that. We want to preserve the rights of the people living there, and that throughout history built a relationship of dialogue, exchange, and they live with them. So the idea of caring and safeguarding instead of exploiting and usage of resources and land. Now, to wrap it up, in front of all the protests of the indigenous populations, because I didn't say that at the beginning, but the indigenous rights that we know are centered around the land. The land has a specificities important for the populations. It is acknowledged in the Constitution, the Treaty 169 of the UN. There is a lot of international laws that acknowledge this specific relationship between indigenous people and the land. And as I say, I didn't mention that at the beginning, but the third part, 1/3 of all the indigenous population of Mexico lives in this region. We have here the figures. It's important. I'm getting to it. One moment. There it is. 32% of the whole indigenous population on a national level lives in this region. So it is really difficult to not take that into account. You have to take into account the fact, as I was saying, we must take into account the fact that we must think the development of the land, and at the same time take into account what this project can do to the indigenous population. So in front of the increase in protests and trials, because there have been many of them, because also the train was built during the pandemic, so protests in the streets were not possible, but the protest was developed then, especially starting from in the court, constitutional trials, in order to face this issue. And about 3 years ago, the government decreed that the realization of the entire railroad would be assigned to the army. And then they decided that not just the construction was given to the engineers of the army, who would direct and build the whole project, but also that all the proceedings coming from tickets and so on would also be administered by a holding, by a society realized and owned by the government. It was an SPA, a joint stock company connected to the army, which will manage all the proceedings of the train and also have the opportunity to build infrastructures. They are building 6 hotels. One is in the nuclear region, the central region, Kalamuti, which is the second biggest forest area after the Amazon forest. So on one side, we have the militarization of the territory that works as a tool against protests. Because if you have a protest against the civil state, it's different than when you do it against the army, not even the police. And this excessive security that is put upon the project, starting from 2022, it was decreed as a national security project. This makes it possible that there is an exception state where the environmental law and the law concerning human rights is totally negligible and is not respected, because the project was declared as a national security project. So it bypasses all the national law. And this is the icing on the cake, because environmental protests have not been done. Evaluations of the environmental impact has not been done. And also on the social impact, no research has been done. And thus, this mega project is being built, the cutting edge project, which is the flagship of this administration. In 2 weeks, we are going to have the elections. The candidate of the same party at government is going to win, and she proposed to expand the railroad grid, and we will see even worse evolutions in the future then. You can see here a blog where I upload the work I write. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Giovanna, for giving a frame to all the situation. I understand this is not just a train. There is much more behind it. Now I'm telling you, we have already received 2 questions. The first one is asking, what are the connections between Tren Maya and the oil and gas industry? Do you think that this project could continue the exploitation of these resources and impeding a just transition, green transition? And the second question, you talked about that now, but on an international level, we don't hear that enough. Are there any experiences of opposition coming from the bottom against this project, from the side of the Maya population and the rest of the civil population? So oil and gas is the first, and opposition from the civil society is the other. Well, to answer the first question, I share my screen again. I want to show you a map. There it is. Now you can see in the central part of the corridor, you can see oil reserves, Dos Bocas. Reservas Petróleo Dos Bocas. You can see there. The Mexican government has promoted in the last administration the building of several mega projects. Tren Maya, the Corredor Interoceánico, the intra-ocean corridor, and the refinery of Dos Bocas. The Mexican state produces oil, but it's not refining it. It's exporting it and then importing fuel. So this nationalist idea of the government of strengthening the national production have promoted the building of some refineries. There are a few of them, but they're not enough to refine all the crude produced by Mexico. A new large refinery, Dos Bocas, is built in an area in the coast of Tabasco state. It was also a reserve of trees, and they have all been removed. There are no mangrove trees anymore. And it's all just a refinery that is still not working. It was launched 3 years ago, but it's not working yet. So yes, the idea of the state now is, as we can say, it's anachronistical. It's something that we could see in the past century. It is betting on oil. As long as we have oil, we leverage oil. So that's what they are thinking. We have to put them all on the market. And of course, we should not rely on the large companies of the sector and reestablish national companies. And this is all also very important. It's part of the modernization narration that the government is giving. And we also have fracking in Mexico. It is formally forbidden, but actually it is not. We would not allow fracking, they said. And then you see in the land that there are many wells that are being exploited with hydraulic fracturing. So as long as there is oil, they put it on the market and extract it as much as they can. The second question, protests. Well, this is difficult to tell. As I was saying, by a juridical point of view, there have been many trials. There have been many emergency measures used by the government. It is difficult because on one side, there are all those mega projects, and then the velvet glove that is hiding the steel fist, the iron fist of the government, and for social security programs that are not implemented, and for the extreme poverty. This makes it possible that there's just few money that is distributed on a very large amount of people that is extremely poor. So that means that as a minor improvement in quality of life can be politically managed as if it was a huge shift in society. A large part of the population that receives this kind of money that never received before feels a moral obligation towards the administration. And this served as an element that deactivated the dissent of people. So protests have occurred across the years. Most of them were made invisible or were discredited. And indeed, they were not held in the strength and the effects that could have brought about because of the reasons I said.
Thank you very much. I think this management of protests is very interesting because on one hand there was militarization and it becomes a challenge, and on the other hand there are some sort of minor interventions of social and economic nature which generate micro consent. Then there's a third question asking, you mentioned the absence of social and environmental impact assessment. Are you researchers trying to bridge the gap? Are you doing something? The academia, the intellectuals, how do they fill the gap? So they submitted some once the work had already started. And since then, the work changes, especially, for example, in the Caribbean coast, they changed the track 4 times. They presented the environmental impact assessment on the first leg of the work. But then they change again, and there's no environmental impact assessment. So initially they had started building the work parallel to the work, and then they decided to change the track and have it cross the forest. So one, it was called as a matter of national security. What does it mean? In the decree declaring that it is a national security project, it says that this way the builder of the work first should submit the EIA and then have the authorization of the Ministry of Environment and then start building. But since it was important to really assess what was happening in the environment, it took time to submit the assessment. And the government was supposed to complete in 3 years because in 6 years. And so they had promised that they would finish the project in 6 years because next week, in 2 weeks, there will be election. So the company that builds will only have to submit a request for authorization, for temporary authorization for environmental impact without submitting the entire EIA, only a request for temporary authorization. The Ministry of Environment is forced to authorize this request in 5 days without ever seeing the environmental impact assessment. Then the work begins. The entity, the building company, will have 1 year to submit the full environmental impact assessment. After 1 year, you've already completed the work. So you submit the assessment once the work is completed. So the impact has already been completed, has already happened. Clearly, there was a number of complaints from academia, from environments linked to natural science that tried to report this, but obviously we go back to the start. So national security, you can say whatever you like, it doesn't matter. This project was mandated, and the President of the Republic never missed a chance to silence the contestants in the academia, calling them middle-class intellectuals, not knowing reality, corrupted environmentalists financed by the US. So everything aimed at disqualifying the research work, spreading critical thinking. And this is quite worrisome. So when we started submitting the early environmental impact assessment, we also submitted very bulky documents containing remarks, but they were never taken into consideration. Thank you. The narration was we will complete it in 6 years. And in fact, they managed to reach the objective of completing the work in such a short time. And being able to complete this project was propaganda, basically. So we understand that criticism from the government is quite a popular way to suppress contestants. So I would like to thank you. I don't see any other questions. It's important to think about this initiative that is quite attractive at the global level. The train sounds like something sustainable that enhances archaeological heritage. As said, it looks like Mexico is teaching how to combine sustainability, cultural heritage, and so on and so forth. Yes, consider that one leg of the truck is diesel fueled, not electrical powered. So this is important to understand what happens in Latin America with green capitalism. If we think that turning farmers into service operators and moving them to the city suburbs, this should raise questions, because this will lead to have unlivable suburbs at the service of tourism with very low wages. If we think this is development, we should think twice. Thank you, Giovanna. Would you like to add something? Otherwise, we'll leave you to your activity with PhD students. Thank you for sharing your research with us, but for us it's very important. Thank you very much. Thank you, Massimo, for inviting me. And I would like to thank all the people who listen to my telling the joys and the sorrows of Tren Maya, that is not the train and is not definitely a Mayan. Thank you. Enjoy the rest. So it's not the train, it's not the Mayan. I think we have the summary of today, the takeaway message for today. Thank you. Goodbye.